Hello and welcome to the Testing Peers. This week, in this exciting episode, we're going to talk about debt. Testing debt. The most exciting debt of all. And in this episode, we've got a special guest. So I'm going to leave the reveal to the end and start by revealing who we do have. So Chris.
Hello.
David.
Hello.
And our special guest, Ugne.
Hello.
I've said the name probably terribly wrong.
No surprise.
Well, hello and welcome, special guest. We're delighted to be sponsored by Saffron QA, who continue to sponsor us. They're a specialist in testing recruitment and offer a permanent contract and newly developed retaining recruitment service. You can find more details in the show notes, or please reach out to us or to Ben directly. Find out more if you'd like. Now, what's in store with the Bants today?
Well, recently, before the world got a little bit sadder, I went to London with my family and I met, once again, back in the Natural History Museum in London, Dippy, the Diplodocus. Now, Diplodocus has always been my favourite dinosaur. I wondered, what's your favourite dinosaur?
Well, actually, mine was also a Diplodocus. I really loved it when I was little. I had a Usborne book of dinosaurs when I was a wee small lad. And yeah, the Diplodocus. I don't know quite why. I think it was because it's so massive and had such a long neck and such a small head. And there was mainly herbivore, wasn't it? In the book, I think they've changed it now, because in the book it was standing on a marshland, whereas now they seem to suggest it lives more in the water, in the swamps. Yeah, I love the Diplodocus.
How do you feel when people call it a Diplodocus?
It's a bit like naming people, isn't it? It's open to interpretation.
Russell?
Dave. I like Dave. Dave the dinosaur. I have no idea what I'm on about. Because Dave the dinosaur.
I was half
was a
expecting you to
picture.
say Barney, the purple kid's dinosaur.
Not quite. To be honest, I don't have a favourite dinosaur. I remember looking back at it in history and doing things, and remember what I kind of saw was more fossils, but there was never dinosaur fossils. It was more kind of the shells and the sort of sea creatures of that sort of ilk. I've never really been into dinosaurs. Sorry. It's not my generation.
Ugne.
I had to fully think about the name of them, and I might have Googled it because I was never properly into dinosaurs, but there was that little cartoon with dinosaurs, Land Before Time, and it had the pterodactyls in them, and it looked really cute, and with the wings and stuff. So then, cute.
I like that. See, dinosaurs, ageless.
I think they're extinct, mate.
Well, so they are descendants of the birds. Did you not pay attention in Jurassic Park?
No.
Oh, no,
Apart from the fact they've not got any feathers on them, and it's actually very out of date now.
Well, yes. But before we get too carried away talking about dinosaurs, the levels of enthusiasm, listener, are high for this dinosaur conversation. I'm so glad I started it. We'll move on to a much more exciting conversation, debt. Now, do we want to just quickly talk about what we mean by debt? Because we aren't talking explicitly about money. We're talking about maybe paying for stuff later because we didn't do stuff well earlier.
Yep.
You know, mouth writing checks that your ass can't cash.
So, Chris, I believe you might have written a blog about this. So do you want to start us off by giving us a little brief intro to kind of your views on different types maybe of debt there is around testing?
Yeah, well, I wrote a blog based on experiences of seeing things going wrong again and again, history repeating itself. As you work in different places and on different projects, you often see the same things come back, and it's kind of infuriating. And I decided to narrow down to, from my perspective, 5 different types of debt that I called culture debt, document debt, shortcut debt, later debt, and process debt. And just very quickly, culture debt, it felt like the problem where people sort of shrug and give up before you even get anywhere. Like, how am I going to achieve anything if I haven't got my culture bought into stuff? And there's a lot of ways you can sort of go around those things. But in your culture, I can feel there's a lot of organizational cultures where I think people are not bought into things, and we see micromanagement or information not dripping through. That's what I was calling culture debt. There's document debt, which I'm sure you've heard people using Agile as an excuse to not write documentation. under the manifesto saying working software over comprehensive documentation. But documentation comes in many different ways and forms, like just well-written tests or tasks or stories or code, simple things. Stuff not being documented causes problems, single points of failure, gatekeeping, bad. Shortcut debt is, as always, finding the quickest way to the end, regardless of consequences today, because we need to get it now. I used a quote from Abraham Lincoln. Discipline is choosing between what you want now and what you want most. See your thinking there. Then there's later debt, which is always just putting stuff off, will be done later, and you're always going to pay for those things later. And process debt, which is if you've got a process that isn't well organized, well thought through, well put together, you're going to pay for it. You can say there's a lot of crossovers. There are a lot of crossovers, but it's just an intro into those things. Do any of those bits resonate with any people here?
Document one, definitely. The amount of times I've seen Agile used as an excuse for that, for one thing, but also is just the need to get something done without thinking about the next person, the next thing, the training, the onboarding, the whatever it might be. It's not necessarily about writing to the nth degree, but just enough to make the job easier next time. Putting notes into code is the other classic one for me. I consider that documentation. But the amount of times that people write tests without good kind of notes or descriptions around them, so no one could follow them later. And it just annoys me. But I've seen a lot of people make compromises, those things, and it makes life harder. It's so much easier to do in the moment. And Agile encourages that kind of just in time, getting it right there, not going back and that sort of world. So yeah, they're the ones that kind of spring directly into my mind of things that drive me mad.
I'm similar. The one that resonated most with me was, again, the document debt. But actually, document debt fits into lots of other things. It's like later debt. Let's put it off till later on in the project. Let's put it on till right at the end. Oh, we haven't got any budget. Oh, well, we'll just make do and things like that. So I don't think they are all separate from each other. They can all fit into each other. I think the shortcut debt, again, fits into the document debt. We're hitting a deadline. Let's just get this software out as quickly as possible, and we'll suffer the consequences later. Well, there are lots of consequences later. It's the fact that you haven't got it documented. So if someone was to leave the company at that particular point or leave the project, then there's no one knowing of what actually has been done as part of that. So I think that it's a really good list. I don't think you should see any of them as in separate items. I think they are all intrinsic in causing particular types of debt, but it's good to call them out.
One thing I'd add is there's two different types as well, I think. There's intentional and unintentional, where people do things deliberately, make conscious choices. And when they make unconscious choices, they chose the wrong technology just with bad intent, or didn't do a good enough analysis and picked things that creates debt later, or they make a choice without realizing the consequence. To me, technical debt, I'm thinking technical debt in particular here, is something where you made a conscious choice. And unintentional debt is kind of where you've made an unconscious choice, where you haven't deliberately chosen to take a shortcut, to not document it, you just didn't do it. And it is debt. You're still building debt either way. But I think the worst ones for me are where you consciously make choices to do things later. You're willing to put off for tomorrow, and it's going to bite you in the butt, to use Chris's analogy earlier.
They're all quite infuriating, though, aren't they?
They are.
They are.
I think I would also agree with Russell saying that comments in code is also documentation. Without good comments in code, and that doesn't take very long. That I think the other problem with document debt is the fact that so much information is often caught in people's heads. And again, it's like the putting off thing. That you do something. There are shortcuts. You make shortcuts, or there are ways of working around it. And you always have that intention of, oh, I must do it, but time and money and deadlines get in the way. And so when you're bringing someone on board, then you go, oh, yes, you need to do these particular keystroke or whatever in order to get this particular thing working. And that's not written down anywhere because it's just in that person's head. So it's very dangerous thing having document debt. You should write things and keep them obvious as you go along.
It is easier usually to do it as you go. When you've got thought in your head, when you've got the information in your head, and often it's the best of intent we do to leave it later, but we shouldn't. Like building services and small things where you write the release notes or something afterwards. No, do it as you're making code changes. Do it every time you put a little bit of change in, update the notes. Don't wait until you've written 3,000 lines of code and go, what's in this thing? Do it iteratively. Do everything iteratively, your notes, your documents, and you'll have less debt. It's very easy to say, hard to do, because you've got to remember the checklist of things that you need to achieve to kind of be done, for one better phrase.
It's a discipline thing and understanding value and why these things are important, and understanding that what you're doing is not just about you, and big picture thinking, isn't it? Do any of those debts resonate with you, Ugne?
100%. Like, it's for me, it's the document debt and later debt. As you guys said, if you saw my to-do list on a documentation side, it's ridiculous. And it's one of those things where you know what, I'll just do it later. There's more important things now. And then the list just gets bigger and bigger and bigger and grows. And I am paying for it. I am paying for it now. So yeah, it's a difficult thing to manage. And as Russell said, doing it every single time, keeping on top of it, I think that's so important. But again, it's the teaching yourself the discipline of actually doing it, and take some time.
It is hard. I wish I could do what I say sometimes. Sometimes it's easier, like the processes with, like, you make a code change, you have to update notes for it. When it's kind of like onboarding processes, you have to update notes for it. People forget them, no one checks, no one asks, because no one's onboarding. And it becomes a problem when you're onboarding, when you're doing a handover. And often it's the fact that you can't realize the impact of not doing something to a future date that makes it harder for you to kind of remember or to prioritize it. And with that future, you're thinking of the future long term. You know it's there, but it's not today's problem. So you put it off. A lot of debt comes from that sort of thing, like not automating things till later. The classic anti-pattern where you do lots of testing and you'll automate it as a big project later. It happens time and time again because we haven't got time. Now, that will save you time in the long run, but you don't have time now because you need to get a vision of how working well it works now. It could be the system's unstable, so maybe it is the right choice, but we always think about the short term, not the long term. And sometimes it's a bias. We are more going to be impacted by the things that we are aware of right now. We're not going to be thinking of the future all the time. We're going to be thinking of, I had a conversation with someone about onboarding because I've got some onboarders. So it's in the back of my mind. If I didn't have some onboarders, I would have forgotten to remind people to update some documents. So it's kind of being that sort of availability heuristics and things like that come in.
I would say also that, talking about going back again to the document debt and to what Ugne said, is that if you don't do it as you go along, then you get this debt. And then, I don't know about you, but I feel guilty for spending the client's money or putting time in to rectify that debt and to allow us to get back to speed. I feel I need to justify my time that I have to do it. Whereas if I'd done it as I went along, then it would have been fine.
Yeah, it's not including the whole activity in your estimated work or your deadlines, isn't it? It's the whole problem with QA being a separate column in not being included in definitions of done and things like that. It's kind of, oh, but my work is done at this point. It's like, is it really done? And what is and isn't deliverable, and those sorts of things are, yeah, they're problematic, and often those things go unseen if we don't talk about them and raise them. Do you find there are good ways to be able to bring these things up? Have we got good news stories regarding these things?
Yes, no, maybe. When it's had an impact to performance, I've seen a lot of people then help you prioritize things. So onboarding is one, and you've got a knowledge that you're going to onboard a lot of people. People are much more willing to invest in time to make that better. The other one is obviously automation. When releases are slowing down, things are getting hard, or reliability of your automation's got badly because you haven't maintained it as much as you have. People are much more willing to have a spin-off, I'm not saying this is a good idea, by the way, spin-off project to help automate tests or to improve performance of them. It's usually because you haven't done it in the past. But I've seen success, but normally it's when the pain is realized. And it's only when they see the pain will they kind of listen to this idea or give you more time and you're done.
It's almost too late at that point. Isn't that something they say when you must be looking after your mental health, right? Look after your mental health or your body will make you.
Yeah, it's your system's making you often in these cases. It's not good. And it's harder to make an angle until someone sees the failure, in my experience. If you can show a trend backwards, you can get more time. But if everything looks good, people don't want to invest. If things seem to work, people aren't willing to change. Status quo bias. I'm very biasy today, it seems.
It's as if you did a talk about biases last week, Russell.
Maybe.
I found something that was related to ADHD. I think a lot of people can relate to certain aspects of ADHD. And there's a thing called a possibility clutter. And that's the enthusiasm for possibilities of the future is wonderful and stimulating. But it can also be troublesome because it can lead to a clutter of unfinished projects, a trail of unrealized intentions, and a squeeze on the schedule. It's that whole just new and shiny, the sort of ethos people say is stop starting and start finishing. And we see things like bug graveyards and to-do lists that are so long that we don't look at them anymore, or failed automation that's so big that we just ignore it now because where is the value in that thing because somebody went off somewhere else? Is that something that resonates? I saw a few nods, Ugne.
For me, it's the to-do lists, but I tend to do the thing where I just discard the old one and start a brand new one, and when the problem comes up, then we write it down again. So yeah, but definitely relate to that.
I kind of deal with that with a lot of things in life. It's only important if someone asks twice.
I definitely do that with emails. But one thing I was going to say was that, so lots of people do like the new and shiny stuff. And actually, if you're on a project for a long time, then actually the expectation of writing documents, you just get a bit bored with it, bored with what you're actually doing and the repetitiveness or whatever. And actually, you're eager to finish it. So therefore, you sometimes take shortcuts or you don't do things that documentation. So therefore we are all guilty, I would say, of building in document debt for the future and hope that it will go away because we're not on the project anymore. So therefore no one will come back. And it doesn't really matter if it's not there. So I do think that sometimes we go searching for those new things and then build our own document debt as part of that.
Often those new things cause another form of debt, though, change debt. So when, for example, you find a new automation tool that's shiny and better and so on, and you try and shift everything, you've got the debt of having to run two things in parallel and transition something across from one to the other. You've got to build something up. So you don't start doing all the good things. You end up kind of just trying to get to the next goal. You're almost firefighting constantly. And, that builds a debt. It's not maybe a technical debt, but it certainly is a debt to kind of, you've got to mentally maintain two skill sets. You've got to run two things, do two things, which generally always causes complications. And human brains can only do so many things at once. We're not the world's greatest multitaskers. That's not what you get humans for. I see a lot of new shiny things cause a lot of debt because you do a new process, but everything that's kind of old is in the old process. So kind of nothing makes sense to new people.
I think another thing that's, I don't know if it's really debt, but it's the context switching. If you're on multiple projects, you almost have this debt of time when you stop one task and start another because you can't instantly context switch. So I think that is sort of a type of debt because it's lost time, and so therefore you've lost it to the project.
Here's an open question for everyone. Is there any time where you've got debt in terms of tests where something's not tested that thoroughly in a regression pack, for example? Ignore the automation side of it. There's a lack. Reluctant to call it coverage, but let's call it this generic coverage term. That you've got a debt, and what do you do about it? Do you do anything? Do you just kind of write on a list? Because how have we tackled those sorts of things?
If there happens to be a process where we get to talk about risks, that would be an opportunity to do so. Let's not forget that often based on the process debt, there are often things that we don't know how the whole things work. Who's doing what? Who's responsible for what? Who's accountable for things? Who needs to be informed about stuff? And we see a lot of companies and teams and projects that are very fractured. Sometimes there's a faceless business, or there are folks that are only available for a certain amount of time, or people that are trying to do marketing and they don't understand the product they're selling, or people who are testing who don't understand the complexity and developers not willing to share those things. And it can be very difficult, even if you have said, I'm not confident in this, for that to actually change. Because it's one thing being able to say there's a problem, right? I've got a gut feeling, I'm good at critical thinking and those things. But to translate that into a way that actually becomes a thing that actually actions, because and we've talked about testers being blamed once something's been released, and then there was a bug that got shipped in production or something. But it's difficult if we haven't got that process, if we haven't got the understanding of who is what, where are they, who needs to know what's my audience for this, that, and the other. If we don't have that in place, that process that isn't put together well, that process all in one piece, then how can we be sure, because maybe it was tested further down the line. Maybe we had good unit tests. Who knows? Maybe the unit tests weren't appropriate for those things. How do we know? Did we see those results? Do we have access to those tools? There's a lot of things, and often having that authority to speak to those things, it can be quite daunting, like joining a new company, joining a new team, and speaking with authority about stuff and getting respect. I know as testers, we found it hard sometimes to get respect from folks in different departments, but sometimes you just know, don't you? That's not easy.
Another open question. How have you guys and girls identified debt? How have you gone about it? So let's say we all know we've all got some debt somewhere. How have we identified it? Is there any techniques, tools, tips? We just wait for disaster? I've definitely done the last one. I've waited for disaster. Done other things as well. Like
I think I've waited for disasters as well.
It's a good learning curve. When it goes completely wrong, you realize something's gone wrong.
I don't actually have any tools to actually do it. I think it's just a natural progression. And I think this is a part of the problem, is the fact that it sort of creeps up on you. If you're not on top of it, or on top, especially the document debt, it creeps up on you. And therefore you realize how much debt you've got. And so therefore you then need to scrabble around for trying to find out how to mitigate that and try and rectify some of that back. And I know that sometimes people put an extra part of the sprint in where they're getting rid of the technical debt as part of that to try and get back some of that. But I think there's a bit of sort of denial. Well, there's an acceptance that there is debt, but there's a denial that it's a major problem until it becomes a problem. Then there's an acceptance of it. That seems to be the general picture that I have.
I see. I used to work with Ugne, and one of the key attributes that she had was that she had a gut that told her when something wasn't right. And that transpired was something that we could trust. So actually, the goal for me was to try and give Ugne the confidence to speak to that gut, to trust her gut, and to know that the right thing to do was to actually talk about it and to back her up and to talk about those things. Now, I don't know, Ugne, if you found that sort of thing helped, that you were given the ability to speak to those things, but certainly it was, some people have got that just instinct that just you want to hear more about them, because clearly, like, if you feel it, you can articulate it. And I think you did a really good job.
I think I found it really hard at the start. So having someone like you to back me up on this things was really useful, and actually to allow me to raise, let's say, those concerns. And it's extremely helpful, because I think within at least our company at the time, I was one of the youngest people there. And it was always had the part of the imposter syndrome. And I was just like, oh my God, like, am I actually right? Like, I haven't been a tester before. I would question myself so much. So I think, having that person to back you up is so important. And slowly just get to the point where, like, it does make sense. And I think I know what I'm talking about. But you even get it now. Like, up to this day, I get it now. And there's a few bits that you put in a leaving letter that I sometimes reread, and I'm like,
oh gosh, now that's going behind the curtain a bit. I'd forgotten about that. When I left the company where we worked, I did write a letter to everybody, a personal letter to everybody that was on my team. And I can't remember what I wrote to anybody, but I meant every word. It was a while ago.
I ugly cried when I read it. Like, I sobbed.
Was the writing that bad? Was it all song lyrics and things?
I think there was something there. Of course, yeah, there's a song lyric. Come on. Yeah.
It was Chris that wrote it, then at least it's proof.
But yeah, it's good. I still got a screenshot. It's still there. Done a good job.
I think you actually hit a nail on the head, though, which is guts. People are very good at identifying risk. It's like developers, but if they're nervous changing a bit of code because it might go wrong, that to me is a great sign that we haven't got good test coverage there, because they don't want to come back and hold them. And people are kind of one of your best indicators of the problem. Like, if you say to someone, go and do this process, and they go, I don't know how, and you go, there's a document, though you realize there isn't a document, it's a good indication that there's a problem. Or seeing people do things inconsistently. Doesn't mean your document or your process isn't clear. It's a good sign there may be something not quite right, or it may have evolved for some, so it could do with an update, or not for others. But people, I think, are one of your key things for this. They have a a gut, an unknown thing behind the scenes that kind of senses risk. It's a bit nervous about doing something or doesn't like something. And verbalizing it's quite hard, but giving people the power to kind of voice things and helping them articulate it is probably quite valuable at hitting some of these debts. And I kind of like giving people objectives around these sorts of things. If they spot and think things that they could be done better, they're objectives that help everyone, not objectives for the sake of it. But that person has a gut feeling, they know something's not quite right. If you can help them and guide them, everyone wins.
All objectives, yes.
I was going to say that another thing that's important is for us as managers is, as Chris said, that he supported Ugne, is the fact that we need to support people. We need to be able to give them a voice. We need to be able to, as Russell said, what we've all said, if they've got that gut instinct, they are the people on the inside. They are the people that are playing with it or testing the actual software. So if they've got a gut instinct that something isn't quite right, then we should support them. We may need to protect them from the potential onslaught, if depending on the culture of that particular thing, but we need to take them seriously and support them in that, because otherwise it shows integrity. We have to, as part of our craft as testers, we need to have integrity, and trying to hide things away from clients or from the actual project is not what we're about. And so if someone does have a problem or sees an issue with debt, then we should encourage them to talk about it and to take things on board and act on them.
There's a nice quote in the 6 Practices of Kanban, which says, you can't improve something you don't understand. That's why a process should be clearly defined, published, socialized. People would not associate and participate in something that they wouldn't believe to be useful. So when everyone is familiar in the common goal, they would be able to work and make decisions regarding a change that would have a positive impact. Just leaning more into that about people and socializing and sharing things helps us to mitigate that debt up front. Speaking to those things, so what actually is within my means now? If there's an understanding debt that's come through documentation, or if there's a process problem, that should be something that, well, firstly, as a leader, you should probably know about if you've worked in somewhere long enough. And as testers, we like to ask a lot of questions to gather context and things. But we're saying it's about empowering people to speak to these things and then to listen to them and to then do something about it. Have you got any examples of situations where you have raised a concern, a debt problem, a risk, and not been listened to? You've seen it happen, and you've how have you dealt with that? Have you been able to say, "I told you so," or "Let's use this as an opportunity"? How have you dealt with it when that has happened? It's car crash sometimes, right?
I guess the example I can think of is less testing, more development. But again, quality is part of the whole process. It's combined. It's where I remember some work on a project where some developers said, this bit's very dangerous, bit buggy, it needs refactoring. No one can really understand it. It's written in a way that was just done to get it over the line. And we all accepted that was the plan at the time. We put it off. We need to come back. And I was like, no, we haven't got time. Don't do it now. And obviously change was made. It was rushed. We went out, had problems. We had to fix it under rush. We said, look, we told you. And then next week, a massive change was needed. So they wanted new features that included that area again. And we had to change it again. Again, the deadline was 3 days. Stupid short times. I can't remember the exact period. So the team, again, saying out loud, this needs refactoring. This is just turd. You don't want to go near this thing with a barge pole. So then they kind of did the same change again. And guess what happened again? The whole thing broke. And this time it was much bigger than the last one. And they're just saying, look, we need to do this. We need to fix this because this is just getting ridiculous. And we tried to give them time, as in I tried to champion their need. But obviously this sudden requirement and all the rest of it. And it was always we'll get that next month. Next month, we'll put on the list of things we need to do. And obviously all the things that the next few features they wanted from product were all around this one area. And then we told them that if we want to touch this thing, the thing that you think is about a day's worth of work or a week's worth of work is about 2 months now. We will not go near that thing anywhere. And unless we get time to refactor it, any estimate for any of that work has just gone through the roof because we were empowered to make estimates. So it went catastrophically wrong because we took a system down for one reason, and we damaged some systems for the other reason. The only way we dealt with it was by increasing the estimates to basically say, if we go near this thing, we know they're going to need more testing, they're going to need more time, they're going to need more effort. We're not going to trust it. Everything we've got in place, the regression, the automation stuff, the unit test doesn't cover it. And no one likes it. No one understands it. We're likely to make things worse. So we just upped our estimates. So by doing that, we basically said, look, if we get to refactor it, then our estimates will go down and the change will be easier. And ultimately, we got agreement to make the change right. So we did both the refactoring and the change in the same time as we estimated just to do the change. And I hope, I haven't been there long enough, I've left now, that's been a better area. No one's scared of that area anymore. That's my war story.
Excellent. Ugne, have you got any war stories?
Probably too many sometimes when you think about it.
Any about Chris?
You know what? Chris and I work really well together after 10:30 in the morning.
After that coffee.
2 coffees.
Sorry.
Has to be 2. I think even at the moment, I think one massive thing for us is after every release, we always get the same thing come back to us. And it's one of the errors, but the same error within little different parts of the whole system. And we always say we need to just correct them all, fix it properly, and then, it's going to be fine, no hot fixes, none of that. And instead, what we do is we just patch that fix and we never actually focus on it. So even thinking about it now, the amount of time that we spend and the cost that it incurs for us to just patch it every time, I'm thinking, what would it be if you actually just, allocated the people to just fix it properly for once? And I think that's one of the things that I deal with probably every 5 weeks. And whenever it comes, I'm just like, I don't care anymore. We're just going to do the same thing again. So painful.
It's very interesting that the expectation, because debt has been built into it automatically of that repetitive, and you almost feel sort of a sigh. Oh my God, yeah, it's the same thing again. What a surprise! How many times have I've done tests before that I know are going to fail because we haven't yet fixed them, and every time, and then you get a new starter and they go, well, why is that failing, and yet you're accepting it because it's part of the process. We know that is the expected behavior, even though it's wrong. We just haven't got around to it, and that's such a minor thing, it's not going to happen. And we're building this technical debt and accepting it. And sometimes it's useful to have new starters to question, well, why are we accepting that we can then start building it up and going, actually, you're right, you should be pushing that a bit more, because we shouldn't be accepting that.
Yeah, it's a very good point. We often just accept things, we just get used to, we stop fighting, in effect. It's I don't know what it's called, but we just stop fighting because we keep fighting and we know it's wrong, but then it's just not worth the effort anymore. And then until someone comes and reminds us, why have you got 20% of your automation tests always failing for the same reason? Oh, well, we just haven't got to them. Why not? Well, there's some bugs in it and we're just not going to fix them. So is it one bug that fixes 20%? Yes. What you're doing with them, fixing them manually, testing them manually? That seems silly. And that they may not say the word silly, but it's the implication of it that you realise does make you feel a fool at times. Maybe
there's that broken window theory, isn't there? The idea that if that thing isn't addressed, a small broken window, if that isn't addressed, then just more and more and more happens, and things just scale and get worse. That debt is ever growing, right?
Technical pride, I guess. If you operate with a kind of high pride environment with a few broken windows, then you're less likely to break a window, or you'll care more if a window break.
Yeah,
definitely applies. Yeah. It's kind of the reason for keeping like test quality high, things like that. Keep a high standard, then generally speaking, you get less of these things. No one's impervious, but you get higher quality overall.
Well, thank you very much for that fantastic discussion. I think that it was a really useful one, especially for me, and we covered a lot of ground there to do with debt. I hope you found it as interesting listening. If you do have any feedback or any other horror stories of your own about debt in your own companies or in your history, then please do reach out to us. You can contact us via email at contactus@testingpeers.com. You can go through the normal social media channels. So we're on LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. You can also support us along with Ben at Saffron QA, a sponsorship at patreon.com. And I'd like to thank Ugne again for helping us out on this particular episode. we look forward to welcoming you back in a couple of weeks' time.
For now, it's goodbye from the testing peers.
Goodbye.